Slashers meets Old Boy meets Cube. It's a wild ride. Hello and welcome to Rotted Review of the Day, and today I am taking a look at the 2019 Shudder exclusive, The Furies. This is the feature-length motion picture debut of Tony D'Aquino, and first of all, this is at its heart a slasher film. One thing that can be said about most slashers is that they can be juvenile and they can be formulaic. Going so far as it's one of the most easily dissected horror subgenres out there. The rules and when you go camping and so on and so forth, and how to survive. It almost becomes like a self-referential joke. And one thing about this film is that it takes that concept and throws it in the garbage. And it comes up with something fairly unique. It's kind of an amalgam of different styles that all come together to come up with something fairly original and something that I really enjoyed. This was a very good, bordering on great slasher film without actually managing to cross the line into greatness. And it really could have. Except for one or two missteps, and I will get into those in a little bit. So in this film, we follow the main character of Kayla, played by Airlie Dodds, and she is with her best friend Maddie as they are tagging up a tunnel, and they get into an argument. It's actually not the most natural argument in the world. It actually kind of feels a little bit forced, but regardless, they part ways, go down different out into the tunnel, and Kayla hears Maddie in a scuffle. Get off of me, get away from me, things like that, and runs to help her, and they both wind up getting abducted by unseen folks. And Kayla then wakes up in the middle of a forest, inside of a box, and doesn't know where she is, doesn't know why she was put there, doesn't know who put her there. In that regard, it has kind of a very old boyish feel to it, being abducted by an unknown stranger or waking up in a box. And soon finds out fairly quickly that there is a maniacal axe-wielding monster man, mask-wearing monster man out to get her. She runs into other people that woke up in similar situations, other girls, and there are weird things happening here. It's not just put them out in the world with axe-wielding murderers and click play. This has very peculiar elements to it that lend itself to a great mystery. Written on her box was Beauty 6. And then she comes across other boxes. Some of them say Beauty, some of them say Beast, and all of them have a number attached to them. As they are running and hiding and attempting to survive, this group of girls, something very peculiar happens. And in my mind, this was almost the solidifying moment of when this movie really, really grabbed me. As one of the girls gets victimized and brutally slaughtered, and Kayla witnesses this, she is pretty much caught dead to rights. Out in the open, the killer sees her after being done with his first victim there, and you think that, okay, well, now it's going to turn into a head-to-head fight, something along those lines, and instead, the monster looks at her and that was a great moment for me. That really, I always say, one of the best things about horror is that at the core of it, it's a mystery. And this had a very kind of almost cube-like feel to it, not quite as intelligent, but still that kind of element of, abduction and waking up in a weird place and then trying to figure out the rules of what's going on. All you know is that if you break the rules or if you don't figure them out enough in time, that it has deadly consequences. And in this case, instead of having, interesting, intelligent traps to it, it has axe-wielding murderers. So the entirety of the movie was basically spent trying to figure out what was going on, what were the rules. As the characters were trying to figure this out, so too was I, as I was watching it. And that made for a very interesting watch. Not only was I really enjoying the slasher level of fun entertainment of the horror film in front of me, which, by the way, this was very entertaining in that regard. For you gore hounds out there, this really does deliver. This has a very gory, bloody, visceral feel to it, and has some of the best kills I've ever seen. One in particular was fantastic in its technical execution and how brutally slow it was. But at the same time, as the movie's going on, you're trying to figure out, well, what is actually going on here? Why did that one? Why did he wave? Why didn't he just attack her? And trying to get your mind wrapped around, why this, why that, why Beauty 6, why, Beast, why, who put her there. It was great to just try and wrangle that in the brain while they're also figuring things out and figuring out the rules as they watch other people break them and then figure out, well, what did they do differently than I did, and so on and so forth. I think the problem of where this movie fell down just a little bit and why it didn't really cross into greatness was the ending, and I'm not going to spoil it, but what I will say is that as the film was going on, I had two major hypotheses, and I was really hoping it was neither of them. Just because they seemed somewhat obvious. And I don't know if that's just because of the the library of horror films that I've seen in my day, but they did seem a bit obvious, and it wound up being an amalgam of the two. So instead of surprising me, it kind of wound up, well, I guess I figured that out somewhat early, and that's a little disappointing. But regardless, and the reason I was hoping it wasn't either of those two was because it didn't feel very satisfactory, and it did feel a little bit obvious. And one of the Pixar 22 some odd rules of storytelling is, for the people that are writing the stories, is think of the first obvious situation here, or answer, or whatever, and then throw it away. And think of the second, third, fourth, fifth, and throw them all away. Surprise yourself by thinking of things that aren't obvious. And to me, this just felt a little bit obvious. So I was hoping for something a little bit more intelligent. I was hoping for something a little bit more surprising. And I honestly would have been happier if it hadn't answered much of anything at all. If it basically had gone through the rules and you had a solid idea that the filmmakers knew what the rules were, but just didn't feel inclined to tell the audience and left it vague, like Cube. And then, it would have subsequent substandard sequels to answer that, like Cube. But I would have been happier with that regard. But as it was, I still really did enjoy this movie. It had me on the edge of my seat. It had me loving the characters and watching them as they try to figure things out. Except for one. There was one thing that I'm going to backtrack from something that I usually say here. I often accuse horror films of being a little bit too on the nose and in your face, and I would rather have a little bit more subtlety. But in this case, there was one character in particular that I think there was an element of her that was slightly off. I don't know about mentally deficient or socially juvenile or what, but it made for some interesting and odd choices in the decision-making process of the characters that felt out of place if you had not had the idea that there was some mental deficiency or some juvenile social tendencies there. And I think that layer of her character was too subtle, that we needed to have a little bit more solid info on what was going on with her, because as it was just treating her as a normal functional adult, it was peculiar just the way that she was behaving and the decisions that she was making towards figuring things out along with the rest of the group. So I honestly wish that would have been phoned in or waved in with semaphore flags just a little bit harder, because that was it was jarring is what it was. But started to pick up the clues. So there's something not quite right there, and then things started clicking a little bit more. Still not entirely sure what her deal was, but regardless. So I'm going to go ahead and throw up all the scores here. As always, 4 different categories, each one worth up to 25 points for a total possible score of 100 points. The plot of this one, for all the reasons that I discussed about how it missed the mark and there were missed opportunities, especially in regards to the ending and some of the characters being fleshed out a little bit more, I do think that is the score that suffered the most. But 14 in my opinion, just on a plot level, is still fairly high for a slasher film. For something that is traditionally brainless, this did have a brain in its head, and I think it did deliver. So, not a high score, but at the same time, a high score? The intent, I do think it delivered what it was trying to do. It was fun, it was intelligent, it was gory, it was suspenseful. I do think that it achieved the mark there. The acting performances, there weren't too many of them, but what there were was done well. And the technical, I think especially, really get some high marks here. The gore was really convincing. The special effects in this one were great. And some of the aesthetic choices for how it sold the story as it was being slowly revealed to us, I did like that. So the notion of setting this in the daytime and some of the camera work involved, I thought was brilliant. So all told there, that is the high score of this lot. And so that gives us a total of 70 out of 100 points, which is honestly pretty darn high for a slasher movie. If you take a self-referential slasher movie like You Might Be the Killer or Tucker and Dale vs. Evil, that's taking the subgenre and putting the funhouse mirror in front of it and showing it the ridiculousness of itself, which has its place. But this movie didn't do that. This was just a straight slasher film that managed to have decent storyline, some intelligence, and some quality characters. So on that note, would I recommend this movie? Absolutely, I would. I think that this should make everybody's list. Again, not a great movie, but a very good one, almost great. And I think that you'll enjoy it, that I know that I did. So that should about do it. That should about wrap this one up. That is 2019's The Furies, available currently as a Shudder exclusive. Thank you very much for joining me here today. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. If you like this video, please click like and subscribe. And if you want to support me further, my Patreon link is below. Remember, next time you want to watch a horror movie, first make sure that it's good and rotted.